You wouldn't expect someone running for a political party to demonize their base so heavily.
Yeah, I want to point out something, and this is a problem. I'm probably going to speak about it probably on my show next month, but this is a problem I've been having when I speak to, your typical liberal, the person who would support a Hillary Clinton. They speak about Obama and all these great things that he's done and how great his presidency has been. And I say, well, under his watch, Democrats have lost, 900 seats across the country. State elected officials, local elected officials, county elected officials, all across the board. They lost like all over the place. And then it culminated into Donald Trump becoming the presidency at the end. So they lost all that. The party is greatly diminished. Yet somehow Barack Obama and the Democratic brand is strong and it's great and it's doing all these great things. Basically they're in a dark place, and it's almost as if they're in the party's almost in its own death throes, so to speak, and it can't even recognize.
Well, the Democratic brand at best, the strength of the Democratic brand is at best a delusion, joint delusion of very key people, key demographics in key places. So, your upper middle class elites in coast cities and in urban centers, your pundit class, your X, Y, and Z. And at worst, it's a Ponzi scheme, right? It's a Ponzi scheme. It thrives on convincing these people that there is strength in investing their time within the Democratic Party. There's strength in investing your time and money and, whatever other resources you have in this party, when functionally they've lost at every level. They have lost a record number of seats in state legislators under Obama. They've now lost the House, the Senate, the presidency, and they're going to lose the Supreme Court. They've lost most governorships. And there seems to be this joint delusion that you're right when you talk to Democratic people who support the Democrats, that the Democrats have won something. And this delusion seems to be based entirely on the fact that we had a black president and that you can't say the N word on TV anymore. So, and the Democrats feed into this delusion by making everything about the culture war. They reduce every conversation back to identity politics and the culture war, because it's the only battle they've won in the past 30 or so years that has been a definitive victory. But people are tired of that.
Well, because they hang everything on demographics. For the last 8 years or so, with Obama's win in the Obama coalition, and the new influx of Hispanic voters and minority voters that came with him, they thought demographics is king. They stopped focusing on real economic policy issues. They kind of became Republican light on everything except for cultural issues and identity politics. And that's where they hung their hat. And, that's where they laid down and died in this election, because identity politics did not do the job, especially not with Hillary Clinton at the helm. It just wasn't working. She wasn't the right messenger. This wasn't the right time. This was the time for a strong populist economic message. They had none. They had the worst messenger for that message that you can imagine. And it failed them miserably. So unless they come together and really do a thorough autopsy, I hate using that term, of this election, I think that they're just doomed to continue failing, especially if they keep relying on identity and demographics.
But here's my question, and it's for everyone here. Is it really an autopsy? Because frankly, people during the, I don't know what you call it, the massacre, what sort of word language you, during that, people were screaming their problems at them. No one was hiding. There was no shortage of people from various sources on the left, on Twitter, screaming that, hey, you can't do this. You shouldn't do this. This is a mistake. Stop doing it. You need a strong populist message. And to even use the language of, now we need a post-mortem. Now we need an autopsy. Now we need to figure out where things went wrong. It's like, well, no, you don't, because we told you. You were being told throughout the entire process where things went wrong. So to pretend like this is one of a hindsight 2020 situation is kind of disingenuous.
It is to the people who run the party, because they obviously weren't listening. And when they did listen, they responded with insults and dismissing us and our concerns, and calling us Bernie bros and all of that other nonsense. And they didn't listen. So they have this bubble echo chamber that they're all in. These very wealthy, elite Democratic Party leaders discussed these things amongst themselves and thought it was a really great idea to hit Trump on the size of his hands and his language and what the words he uses instead of his actual policy ideas and the horrendous things that he's going to do, and coming up with a good opposition to the meat and potatoes issues that people were really focused on this year. They just didn't bother paying attention.
I want to point out something, and year after year after year, the number one issue, usually, except for times of like, horrible war or conflict or something like that, where it's like people really feel under attack. The number one issue that people vote based on has been the economy. So I don't understand how, you don't have an economic message going into an election. If you look back in the 30s, there's polling data there that shows that Democrats got, 77% of the black vote because black people voted for a New Deal like program that was going to bring jobs and wealth. And even though they weren't included in the direct of spending for the New Deal, they actually benefited from a lot of the, tertiary effects of it, when it was implemented. So, that trend has actually gone, all the way through the Democratic Party. Like they've always voted for them, even though they were racist, even though they wouldn't sit in the same chair or use the same water fountain. They still voted for these people because they were voting based off of their economic interests. Well, even though these people were not always in favor of the civil rights era, they still were able to garner a large percentage of black votes based on just that alone. So this idea that, we have to vote based on identity politics and all that, it just doesn't hold the mustard, because there was a time when people understood that sometimes, it doesn't really matter what somebody thinks about you. It matters what they can do for you or what you can get them to do for you based on a political economy.
Well, I don't know. Okay, so I made this point to Ben a few days ago that I agree with everything you just said. That I don't know. I do know. They made a miscalculation. They made a miscalculation as to the importance of identity politics and getting people to vote, and they discounted all of the other factors that played into the sort of demographic war they were waging with Republicans for the past few decades. They assumed that people were voting for them because of this identity politics message, and they overplayed it. Like it's the same reason why, or rather, it's part of the same mentality that when you go back and they whitewash history to have Martin Luther King Jr. speeches sound more and more about some sort of amorphous notion of blackness and black equality in very, very vague ways, less about class equality, black equity into economic sector. It's this notion that people are really, really concerned with language when most people aren't. Most adults are not really that concerned with language, except for those people who exist in the highest economic strata of society, for whom language representation, those issues are really the only kind of oppression and prejudice that they are not insulated from due to their wealth. So it becomes very hard for them to understand how people don't vote based on these language games because they're trying to feed their kids. In the same way, it's hard for people to understand how, like, let's be honest, there was a big difference between Trump and Clinton. Clinton was the lesser of two evils, but the issue was that they miscalculated how much less evil she was, and whether or not the ways in which she was less evil made a difference to those who were voting, the majority of those who were voting. So you can talk about the way Trump wants to defund a whole bunch of, wants to defund the FDA, wants to defund the EPA, wants to defund the X agency. But let's be honest, the majority of Americans, when you can't feed your kids, they're not really worrying about whether the EPA has had enough funding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, just as you said, when it comes to the magnitude of differential, there really wasn't much distance in them. So yeah, Trump wants to defund the EPA, whereas Democrats just have it be very, very low functioning. It's like, if you're judging it based upon, you know, some sort of bar, some sort of standard where you're saying this is adequate or that's not adequate, and it's not just about you know, being a lesser of two evils kind of deal. It's like, okay, we need adequate this or adequate that. You know, they're both below the bar, so they're both inadequate, and the magnitude really doesn't matter because you're already in the inadequate area.
Yeah, so I'm of two minds.
I think they're there on a lot of issues.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about this. So I agree with what you said there, because we still live in a world where Flint, Michigan does not have clean drinking water. We still live in that world where there are over 200 oil spills every year, many of which go unreported up until the point in which it becomes a really, you know, a big issue. At the same time, we also live in a world where most people, where a large portion of Americans make less than $50,000, $40,000 a year. And I would argue that if you're making less than $40,000 a year, you're probably not thinking of high level issues like the EPA. I would say being overly concerned with, this may seem, you know, churlish, but being overly concerned with the funding of the EPA or having that be the issue you decide who to vote based on is a kind of a privileged position to be in.
And I agree with what you're saying, and I think part of it, part of their ignoring these kind of kitchen table issues is because of their elitism and what they're surrounded by every day, and the things that they have the luxury to be upset about. Things like language usage and kind of more, like you said, broader, more philosophical things. And I think everyone should have the opportunity to worry about those things, but we're not there yet. So, I think the problem that the Democrats have is they're constantly walking this very fine line because they want this broad, big tent. They know that their strength is in numbers, and they want as many people voting for them as they can, because that's how they've won. And the Republicans win when less people vote. The Democrats win when more people vote. That's just how it seems to go. But since the Clinton years, the Bill Clinton years, they've so been in the pocket of Wall Street. They've really become a very corporate party. They've thrown away labor unions. They've thrown away all of those economic New Deal, Roosevelt messaging that they had, and those kind of policy issues. They've thrown those away in favor of more centrist, incrementalist, even, you know, center-right policy positions. So they don't want to draw too much attention to that. And I think that's just the line that they've been walking. And I think that that's why they focus so much on identity politics, is so that they can draw our attention away. And in addition to that, a real populist message would unite the far left and the far right and other people that normally wouldn't be united. And they don't want that either, because then their donors wouldn't be happy.
Well, I think you make a good point. And the Democrats walk a lot of very fine lines. And one of the issues that also comes up when we talk about lesser of two evils policy is that the Democrats largely define themselves by what the Republicans are not. And not having a proactive message really hurt Clinton in this campaign. Not having a good proactive message in terms of what she was going to do besides stop Trump it definitely hurt her. You enter this weird position where the Democrats are overly concerned with what the Republicans can do because it determines what they can get away with. So they kind of walk that really fine line of brushing up against of being evil, but, you know, just dialing it back a little bit. And I think with Clinton, you see them kind of crossing that line where it became almost impossible to tell who really was the more evil candidate. Like, who really was the most evil candidate, because they were relying so heavily on Donald Trump being incredibly evil and people being able to recognize it. But they created a series of material and economic circumstances in the United States where, for the majority of people, they couldn't tell a difference because they weren't concerned with these long-term things like, which is a big issue. But let's be honest, for most people, if you can't feed your kids, worrying about climate change is not really it's not very reasonable to assume.
Well, I can make an argument.
I think we can all make.
Look here, though. Here's where the rubber hits the road, right? Let's say you are concerned about climate change, and that is your biggest issue. You don't have the numbers on climate change alone, and there are other people who have other issues. Perhaps perhaps you align with these individuals and you all get your issues addressed. And you offer them what they need. They support you on what you need.
Well, now you're just talking crazy.
Coalition can be formed, right? And I find that a lot of groups have this problem where they're only concerned about their issue, and they won't make an alliance with somebody on another issue, and nobody gets anything. And it's just like, and then on top of that, after it's all said and done, you want to blame the people that had an issue that wasn't supported. You want to blame them for your loss. And it's just like, well, you know, you have to build your coalition to be able to win election. That is the politician's job. And when you don't do that, that's not somebody else's fault. That's your fault. Well, now, you made a point where you said she campaigned wrong. I don't think there was anything that Hillary Clinton could say and or do that was going to win her this election. She was the wrong person to be up there running. Period.
That's true, but I mean, I would argue that if Hillary Clinton were a completely different person, personality-wise and charisma-wise, she probably could have pulled it off. Probably, in terms of, but this comes down to, I mean, but you're right though, right? So it's like every part of her was so problematic. It becomes hard to separate them out. I think what the real problem was. Was it her obvious lack of empathy for the problem that she caused over the past 20 years? Was it the actual history of those problems? Was it that weird laugh that she does? What was the straw broke the camel's back?
Corruption. The corruption is clear. The clear corruption.
So I would say,
and on top of that, Barack Obama, he just fooled people for 8 years. You know, that's not going to happen again. Like, it's a lot harder to pull the same con. Like,
which is why
everybody's memory.
Which is why she was the exact wrong person to choose, because so many, especially progressives and people on the far left, are so disappointed in so many things that Obama has done, and so many of his tactics in dealing with the right wing. And everybody wants to blame the Tea Party for being so extreme, but like you were saying before, it gave the Democrats cover to go farther right, and that's exactly what they did. They went farther right, and people don't want to tolerate that anymore. If they're going to vote for a Democrat that has all Republican policies, they'll just vote for the Republican. And I don't understand how the Democrats haven't learned that lesson after the past few elections.
We keep focusing in things like learning a lesson. I don't think they're capable to change their ways. They're completely captured. They're completely captured. Okay. They're stuck where they are. They can't get any better.
I don't. Okay, so I agree with what you're saying, but I don't know if I agree with the language there, and I don't want to go. But because it becomes hard to tell, I would make the argument that the people we rely on, your Nancy Pelosi, your Steny Hoyers, your Chuck Schumers, even if they could learn a lesson, could they properly implement it in a way that would allow them to keep power? And my answer would be no. It's like, because
that's what I'm saying. They're incapable.
Yeah, the only lesson to learn from here, the only lesson to take from the loss of Clinton, the queen of neoliberals, is that no one likes you, so please leave. And that's not a lesson that people learn in politics very well. People don't voluntarily cede power. People don't, regardless of what lessons can be gleaned from what occurred. Chuck Schumer is not going to voluntarily cede his power. I will say this, though. Clinton practiced a very patronizing form of politics, insofar that she was very, if you're not with me, you're against me, of where you stood on the spectrum. If you were too far to the left, you're against me. If you're on the right and you won't vote for me, you're against me. I know what's best for you. She basically went out there and made enemies of a lot of different sectors and groups in a way that you wouldn't expect someone running for a political party to demonize their base so heavily. You wouldn't expect that.
So I'll agree with not being antagonistic towards your base. I think that's a huge problem. But I won't say that that she necessarily made an enemy out of everybody who wasn't with her. I think she just had her positions, and people are going to fall where they may. I respect people who can stand on their principle, and if you have enemies that are not going to go with you, F them. You got to move on. You can only be you, right? But you need to better gauge exactly how big your coalition is, right? So if you have issues and you're standing here and you don't have what you need to gain power and maintain that power, you have to basically change your inputs. You need to change your policies in order to grow that coalition. And I just think Hillary Clinton and the neoliberalism brand right now, as it is utterly incapable of doing that because they're captured by the donor class. So,
but that's the criticism of Hillary Clinton, that she lacks growth. For all of the information, all the inputs that have been going into the system, our government, for the past 20, 25, 30 years regarding neoliberalism and all of its faults, they just don't learn anything from that stuff. They show no growth. They will profess to have learned something. Have under the poor, of the minority, of the black, of the Latino, of the female, of all these various different identities. But when it comes to actually instituting structural changes, which as a neoliberalism and dismantling this sort of violent capitalism, they don't seem to they never get that far. They never get past the language.
And this went even farther than just their base. I mean, there was a phenomenon in this election that I had never seen before, and that was a constant barrage of insults to the voters, not the politicians, not the nominees, but the actual voters, the basket of deplorables, the Bernie bros, all of these derogatory terms that were used not only by pundits and regular people towards one another, but also from the candidates towards the voters. I'd never experienced anything like that before, and I think it was just such a colossal mistake for them to turn, because they are incapable, I guess, of learning those lessons, at least for the moment. I hope that's not permanent. I think once they start losing power in a significant way, personally, because politicians do know one thing, and that's self-preservation. Once they start actually losing their power, they might change their tune a little bit, but for now. But yeah, this phenomenon of insulting the voters is just beyond me, and I hope that was a one-time thing, and we don't see that again.
Well, I mean, I don't think so. I think that's going to be an ongoing thing. I think liberalism now has become like, we're smart because we think this way, and if you agree with us, you're smarter than the rest, and everybody else is just living in what they call not the real world, and all these other things that people are trying to get are unworkable fantasy solutions. Oh, yeah. And this is being an adult because they're just children. You don't know what they're talking about.
Oh yeah, the denial of rationality amongst people who don't agree with you inherently is very big in the liberal sector. The smug liberal loves to claim everyone but them, and everyone who doesn't see the world like them is irrational and illogical, and succumbing to some kind of delusion. But I'm tired of talking about the Clinton versus Trump phenomenon. Trump won. Trump won. He's going to be our next president, and let's talk about where we go from here. Let's talk about the resistance. Let's talk about.
Oh no.
Let's talk about rebuilding the progressive movement, and less about whether or not Trump is going to be president, because spoiler alert, he is going to be president. Whether you call him president or not, he's going to be president of America. He is not going to coalesce the left into one unified party. That is not happening for a variety of reasons. But I do know one thing: the people who fail to prevent him from becoming president should not be allowed to lead the resistance.